All right, this is the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain. Our architect is Frank Gehry. This was built in 1997. No, you were not alive. Titanium, glass, and limestone. Titanium, an element, I believe. Guggenheim, this is one of the four, I believe, outlets of the Guggenheim. The original one is in New York. You may have, and our architect is, of the original Guggenheim, Frank Lloyd Wright. Frank Lloyd Wright also, in case you didn't know, was the architect for the Kalita Humphreys Theater in Dallas, which was the main place that the Dallas Theater Center performed before the Wiley was built. But it's still a functioning theater, and they'll still do shows there, but mostly it's used by other theater companies now. If you have not been to the Wiley, you should not, or the Kalita, you should try and go sometime. You can see this was done in, I think it was 60, maybe 62. You can see from its shape is quite unique. It was famous because of the way of the architect, obviously, and the final result of the New York Guggenheim, which is why it was so important when the one in Bilbao was built for them to have a very impressive super impressive sorry, my phone was just doing a super impressive architect. And Frank Gehry is arguably the world's most famous architect. He has won the Pritzker Prize, which is like winning the Nobel Prize for literature, except it's for architecture. There's been a movie made about him. I actually own it. He is very well known. He also did the Walt Disney Hall in, let's see if I got a picture. Yeah, well, that's the Walt Disney Hall in LA. It looks very similar in some ways, although if you look carefully, it's not the same. He's also done some pieces in Chicago. Anyway, he's all over the place. So they wanted to get Frank Gehry because they wanted the building to be just as impressive, just as memorable as the one in New York. And so before I go into this building itself, or talk about the building itself, I need to talk about deconstructivist architecture, or deconstructionist architecture. So Gehry starts out as a deconstructionist architect. That means that he, like the architects like him, are interested in disrupting a conventional understanding of of typical understandings of categories of architecture, and kind of upturning viewer expectations in terms of disorder, and by using disorder and mixing expectations about form and volume and spatial direction and lighting and etc. So ultimately it's about challenging the viewer's assumptions about form as it relates to function. Now, those two words, form and function, those are important. Because Louis Sullivan, who of course is our architect of the Carson Prairie Scott building in Chicago, famously said, form follows function. In other words, that the form must come after a thorough understanding of the function. So in other words, your building that you design must ultimately serve the purpose that is intended in terms of what's going to happen in the building. So form must follow function. And so when you look at something like this, which when you go in absolutely does serve the function of an art museum and serves it well, it's however not, it's defying what you might think of what an art museum might look like. And that's a very typical thing that happens these days, is that museums, when they're built, especially museums that are to house contemporary art, and that's what this does, it houses exclusively contemporary art because that's what the Guggenheim collects, contemporary and modern. There's a difference. Anyway, they tend to sometimes outshine the art themselves. You know, you can possibly go to Guggenheim just to see the building, not to see the art. Okay, so moving on. So I talked about so in terms of the Guggenheim in New York, in case you have, you should go if you have a chance. If you're smart, you will take the elevator up to the top floor. So take the elevator up to the top floor and then work your way down, because it's a spiral and you walk down all the galleries. Otherwise, you're walking uphill the whole time. Okay, moving on. All right, so there's the layout. Wanted to show you some other images of it. This one is, in particular, is quite helpful in terms of understanding where it, how it connects with the rest of the city. And the city itself is really important in terms of this piece. Bilbao is in the Basque region in Spain. If you know anything about the history of the Basque region, it's not always peaceful. Anyway, it was an industrial town that was in decline. Factories were closing down. People were leaving. And a government official, I can't remember his name, decided we want to make a bid to get the Guggenheim here, because if we get this very important museum here, of course, we can experience a cultural and a financial renaissance, right? It was chosen. Bilbao was chosen among a number of other European cities, and it's situated on a former industrial wasteland. Basically, it was kind of just a dead space where there was a number of factories that had gone kaput, and so there was nothing there really. But on the bank of the river that runs through the city. However, it's also smack dab in the middle of the city, as well as in the middle of a triangle of buildings that are kind of the cultural hub of the city. So one of the buildings that surrounds it is an art museum. Again, art, not contemporary art, or modern art, but classical art, I guess you could say. The university and the opera house surround, not super close proximity, but if they create a triangle, and the Guggenheim Bilbao is right in the center. There is a suggestion, as Gary is a deconstructionist, or comes from that school of architecture, a suggestion of collapse, right? So if you look at it, it looks like maybe things are kind of falling here, right? But it's not a completely illogical building. It's not like he just crumpled something up and decided to say that that's going to be the building. There are actual shapes, suggestions of shapes supposed to be there. There's a suggestion of a flower, a ship, and strangely a fish with its head and its tail cut off. Apparently the fish is really big for Gary. His grandmother used to get fish all the time and leave them live and put them in the bathtub and then kill them for food. But anyway, apparently that's a big deal for him. But another thing that you need to remember is that the north side of the building, which is on the side of the river, has more undulating lines, smooth, right, that are suggestive of the smoothness and the movement of the water, whereas the north side of the building, which is where the actual entrance to the building is, you will see stone and windows that are kind of are rectilinear and at right angles, and so this is the side that faces the rest of the city. So it does communicate. So this side is in communication with the river, and this side is in communication with the rest of the city, as it has a more quote-unquote logical way of looking at things. It really is a monumental abstract sculpture. He began in creating it by doing automatic sketching, which is basically you're just drawing without thinking. So that's supposed to kind of be related to your subconscious and let things out that way. From there, he makes models out of boxes, shapes them the way he wants to, and then and this is how he does all his work. And then a computer program kind of fills in the gaps in terms of how can we actually make this a building that is that can actually exist and not just be made out of cardboard. It has a shop, a cafeteria, an auditorium, and 20 galleries and 3 floors of offices. It's kind of like a futuristic city in some ways. Lots of different shapes put together and added with that kind of very shiny titanium, which will burn you, I assure you, so don't lean up against it. So here is Rick Steves, friendly Rick Steves.
The city of Bilbao has recently been transformed from a gritty steel town to a happening cultural center like no other Spanish city. Entire sectors of the industrial city's long-depressed port have been cleared away to allow for new construction. This bridge is part of what's now a delightfully people-friendly riverfront.
That's gotta be
Bilbao's
Calatrava.
Old Town is well worth a stroll. You'll find tall buildings and narrow lanes lined with thriving shops and tapas bars.
I was gonna say that bridge would not.
Bilbao's Old Town is well worth
That bridge, it's probably a Calatrava bridge, and Calatrava is the guy who did the Margaret Hunt Hill Bridge, which is, I think you can see it from where we are. If you can't see that one, you'll see the other one, the other two that are being built off over 30. But Calatrava is also kind of another one of those star architects, along with Frank Gehry.
Bilbao's Old Town is well worth a stroll. You'll find tall buildings and narrow lanes lined with thriving shops and tapas bars. A modern light rail line conveniently laces the Old Town with points along the river to the site which spearheaded Bilbao's urban renaissance, the Guggenheim Museum. While its contemporary art collection is impressive, it's the building, designed by Frank Gehry and opened in 1997, that's created a stir in the world of architecture and put Bilbao on the traveler's map. Gehry's groundbreaking design helped set a new standard for architecture. Using cutting-edge technologies, unusual materials, and daring forms, he created a piece of architectural sculpture that smoothly integrates with its environment. With the bridges, pedestrian promenade, and art all complementing the building, it's an engaging ensemble. Gehry was inspired by a variety of visions. For instance, to him, the building's multiple forms jostle like a loose crate of bottles. Guarding the main entrance is Jeff Koons' towering West Highland Terrier, made of 60,000 living plants, which blossom in a carefully planned visual concert. A joyful structure, it takes viewers back to their childhood. Puppy, as it's known to locals, was meant to be temporary, but the people of Bilbao fell in love with Puppy, so they bought it. Stepping inside, you naturally flow to the museum's atrium, which acts as the heart of the building, pumping visitors in and out of various rooms on 3 levels. The glass and limestone panels overlap each other like fish scales. Each is unique, designed by a computer. Joyful as the building is, the art it holds is even more fun. While the museum's audio guides give meaning to the abstract art, my hunch is that the artist...
Just Richard Serra is the artist of these pieces, and he has a piece in the kind of the garden backyard of the Nasher. It's the piece that kind of looks like this. The two steel plates that are kind of you can walk through. That's Richard Serra.
Are entirely happy for us to simply wander, interact, and play with their creations. This is art that welcomes you in. Bilbao's Guggenheim Museum makes you smile.
Oh boy. That was staged. Anyway, okay, so interior, we can see there's a lot more. We have a variety of levels and different vantage points from which you can see, that occur in the atrium, right? So, and the gang planks that go to the different galleries. It's quite dynamic. The different shapes of the skylights up here, you'll note. Anyway, so that's that.